cancer survivor, you know. I often say to people, I've had flu. I don't say I'm a flu survivor, you know. So yeah, it is surprising. So it's not exactly a placebo effect because, you know, I had the thing, but I do think still I'm such a great believer in the power of mind. You know, as we always say, you think it, you feel it. And it's not that I was doing my best not to think about it. I just didn't really think about it. You know, even going in for the, you know, I was told twice by different sonographers doing radiotherapy, doing the ultrasounds rather, in different hospitals. Like twice they put down their, you know, the thing that they move around over you and said to me, "You're just too calm." And I was like, well, what are you going to be doing to me? As far as I was concerned, this is, you know, pain-free. And going into the operation this time, you know, you walk in, and I was surrounded in this big, they call it a bear hug thing that keeps you warm. And you know, I met the anaesthetist earlier, and then he said something. It was just before Christmas, and I said something about being plant-based, and we talk about Christmas lunch. And he said, "Oh, I'm flirting with being vegan." So we were having this lovely chat about food, and then he said, "Oh, I'm going to give you something to make you even more relaxed." And I laughed, and he said, "Well, look at your blood pressure, not your blood pressure, your heart rate." He said, "You're already so relaxed." And I think that surprised them, that I was just about to get on the operating table, and I've kind of forgotten. So it was such a nice chat.
I'm just curious, you said you're plant-based, so you're pure vegan, are you now?
Yes, yeah, I am. And I have been for quite a few years. And, you know, it's a choice, it's a personal choice. I mean, I think it definitely helped me this time around. As I say, my cancer was very small and it was very manageable. But it's a personal choice. You know, I never would push that on people. I worked on an awful lot with weight loss years ago. And I brought out, I think it was the first book, according to Jack Pransky, it was the first book about weight issues from a principal's perspective. And, you know, it's an area I'm fascinated in, weight loss, and because it's never about the food on your plate, it's about what you think about the food on your plate and that you think about you. It's not on your plate, it's in your head, isn't it? And when I first used to do a lot of research about milk and different things, I did get a bit soapboxy. I was kind of lecturing people why they shouldn't or shouldn't eat certain things. But, you know, I'm much more relaxed about it. That's not my business. It's their business what they eat. So, yeah.
I just wondered if going plant-based was a result of your cancer diagnosis, or were you before then?
Well, probably the first time round, to be fair, because the first time around I got an awful lot more interested in food and you know, the results in your body about the food you eat. And I flirted a few times with raw food diets. I have a dehydrator and I go into thinking I'm going to be raw food. And, you know, sometimes I've got it about 100%, but not often. And it's something I just dip in and out of now. I don't have many raw food days. But I think that started it, because obviously if you're going to look at raw food, then you're not going to have meat or fish because you don't want that raw. So that kind of got me into more plant-based. Yeah. So it's a gradual process, bit by bit. And as I said, I did an awful lot of research for the book. So the book I had out, I think I brought it out in, I think it was January 2013, just as a Kindle book. And it has kind of a chapter on food, and then a chapter on principles, on thought, and it you know, goes like that throughout the book.
So is it primarily about nutrition, your book? What's your book called? Do you want to give your book a plug?
It's called Mindfulness, with 2 L's. Mindfulness, because you know, people would come to me with a mind full of diet information, and also a play obviously on mindfulness. So it's called Mindfulness, the No Diet Diet. Yeah.
I like it.
yeah, it appealed to me. Yeah. So I did a lot of work with weight loss. I've also done a lot of work in the addiction field as well, because I find, you know, I find everything fascinating really to do with the mind, but, you know, addiction is fascinating too, isn't it? So not just food addiction, you know, obviously drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever it would be.
Yes, you can be addicted to anything really, can't you?
Oh, totally. But as we all know, the biggest addiction is to thinking.
Yes, I was one of my previous guests, Peter Mears. He was an addict for years and years and years until he had a suicide attempt and was saved from it. And the three principles has totally turned his life around because of them. So
Yes, yeah, totally. Well, I think when you realize that it's like any, you know, food, anything. If you think that a thing is going to give you a feeling, then obviously you're going to look for a feeling in the thing, aren't you? But when you realize where the feeling is coming from, and you realize you don't need the thing to change your feeling, then it's revolutionary. It's transformation. Yeah. And I had a client. I mean, I started a group in 2012 or 13. It was a group sharing the principles with those in rehab from drugs, alcohol, and mental health issues. And there was a guy there who was like, yeah, I get it. I totally get what you mean. And he said that when he would get the clucking, as he called it, when everything is going, when he desperately needed a fix. And as soon as he met his dealer, as soon as the drugs were in his hand, before he'd even cooked it, all the symptoms disappeared. And he said, I see. And he hadn't made the connection until then. He was like, well, I see, of course, because it wasn't the drug that had made the feeling disappear. Yeah, it was because he had the thought that he had the drug, and he was able to, yeah, have his thing.
It's like a security blanket, isn't it? It's almost like
it is.
You have a favourite toy that makes you feel safe and
totally. And the irony is that if anyone has a child or is around a child and they have a security blanket or, as you say, a favourite toy, you know, if they can't possibly sleep without this certain toy, as an adult, we indulge it because we know it doesn't really matter. Let them have the blanket. Let's go and find the toy, you know. But we don't believe the security comes from it. And yet we do the same things. We think our security comes from so many things on the outside that it can't possibly come from. So we can see it. It's like when you can see it for someone else, isn't it? And you can't see it for yourself.
I'm just thinking about myself. Sometimes if I get really low, it's easy to sort of think, oh, I could do with a glass of wine or some chocolate or something to make myself feel better. And I know full well I don't need it.
Yes.
But it still makes me feel better.
It is. But again, notice when you start to feel better, because you'll feel better as soon as you decide to have it. Not before you've had it, you know, before you've pulled the cork or unscrewed it, you'll feel better. Yeah. You know, it's been proven that dopamine is released at the thought of the thing. So they did this with monkeys and chocolate, also measured. And when we think about something, dopamine is released, but it isn't released at all when we have the thing. Isn't that amazing?
It is, yes. It is amazing, because you do still think, oh, the wine makes you feel better, but obviously no, it's just the thought of getting the wine, having it in your hand.
Exactly. And you see what happens, as we know, is you've got a head full of thinking about whatever it would be, whatever you think you're worrying about or concerned about, and then you start thinking about the wine or the chocolates, and you feel better immediately. So you think you feel better because of the wine or the chocolates, without realizing you feel better because you've let go of the thinking about whatever it was that you were thinking about. So actually your thoughts have changed, and that's made you feel better, but we don't see that in the moment, do we?
Not at all, no. Has anybody else got any questions they'd like to ask Elaine, or any comments?
That's nice. That's nice from Melanie. That's nice. Thank you, Melanie. I'm glad you're enjoying listening. I say I can chat forever. So
I've got my dog is demanding attention at the moment.
Oh, that's nice.
And she's trying to destroy my mother's cushions, so I'm going to have to pick her up so she doesn't destroy my mother's cushion, otherwise she might get for garters. Any hints of having a mindful pet to relax?
I know. Well, the funny thing is, though, don't you find even with a pet, the more you quieten down,
my life
the more they
changed
quieten
completely. Completely. But not initially. When I first came across the principles, I had just lost my father, and I'd sold everything in a one of my sort of moments of madness, probably in grief again. And I was looking for a coaching course because at that point I had a successful fitness business in Cambridge, and I was looking for a coaching course, and I just happened to stumble across Jamie Smart's clarity coaching, but hadn't heard of the principles, didn't know anything about them. And which is interesting because I've studied psychology and, you know, been in psychiatry. And anyway, so yeah, I hadn't heard of them, didn't know anything about them, wasn't told about them at my pre-coaching interview. And at the time I was chronically anxious to the point where I moved from Cambridge to a place in Norfolk in a little house that I was renting, and didn't go out, you know, literally didn't work, didn't go out, sold everything. So I had money, but I couldn't really socialize, and I had PTSD, and so I was on Zoom, and it was just, I couldn't, you know, it was a black box Zoom, not hi, not like what we used to post pandemic, but I couldn't speak on Zoom. And they started talking about something that was completely alien to me. And I thought, my goodness, what on earth are they talking about? I thought this was a coaching course, and they all looked really happy. And I began to get very suspicious that I joined some sort of weird cult and, you know, giving my money away to some loon. Anyway, so I just didn't really understand it. And I was so anxious that I couldn't hear. And I was fortunate enough to go to Tenerife on the retreat to see Jan and Chip Chipman, who you've probably heard of. If you haven't heard of them, whoever listening, they're like first generation principles teachers. And it was the first time I'd been in a group of people for over a year, which was, you know, made me very anxious at the time. But I sat there and did it. And I spoke to Jan and Chip, and something began to shift. I don't know what it was. I can't articulate what it was. But something began to shift in me, and I began to start to listen from a different place, not from my, I don't know what the hell they're talking about place, and not from my completely broken place. But it wasn't until another, I would say 6 to 8 months, where I really had my first kind of new thought, which changed everything for me, which was, oh my goodness, you've been doing all of these things because you didn't know you were safe. And that literally changed everything for me. What I realized in that moment, it was like a little domino effect that just went. I had been chronically anxious and hadn't even known it. I was aware of the PTSD, but I had no idea about the chronic anxiety. I would not have said to you I was anxious. I would have said, well, they say I'm a control freak, but that's their problem, not mine. So my life began to unravel. I started to see people again. I showed up on screen. I started to go to the meetings in London with Jamie, you know, as part of the program. I didn't have to be online. I could start speaking. I started coaching. I started coaching my own groups. I didn't live in fear. And one of the things so I was very busy in my anxiety. So I would, my day was run in time schedules, and I was very anxious if it wasn't on those time schedules. I lived my life like that. Now, at that point of the principles, I had got myself a dog. My son was no longer living at home at that point. He was in Corfu working and living. But I realized, one of the things I realized is that my dog had become my son replacement and my father replacement, basically like the two rolled into one. So I was feeding my dog at a certain time and I was walking my dog at a certain time. And if I couldn't do that, I was getting anxious about it. And I realized, like, you don't have to do that. The dog doesn't care when she gets walked, or, you know, sometimes she's not even hungry when you put the food down. It's like, it's not your child. And the irony was that when my son left home, he was 4 days before his 17th birthday. I'd been doing that from birth to 17, that he had to eat at 5 o'clock. I mean, poor thing. So I realized that was one of the things that I did that I didn't have to do. I think the biggest thing for me was the post-traumatic stress disorder. And the way that manifested for me was that I had chronic flashbacks. And the flashbacks were about my brother and father's accident, identifying my brother's body, and looking after my father for the remaining 24 years of his life. And that many times that was deeply traumatic and painful for us both. And what I realized, one of the ways that I would see a motorbike, because they had a motorbike accident, and I would see a motorbike whilst I was driving. I'd sort of go off into this, what I now know to be like a movie that I was in, but it's called flashback in psychiatry. And I would sort of go into this daze, and then it would make me anxious, and it would, you know, take me a while to snap out of it. And it could be whether I was awake or asleep, you know, dream, nightmares, or awake. But I suddenly realized one day I was driving, I saw this motorbike, and this is going to sound so simple, and it is, it's so hard to articulate this, but I literally had a thought which said, you don't have to follow that thought anymore. And I can't tell you how, how freeing that has been for me after, you know, 26 years, I think, at that point of being scared of that memory, or, you know, whatever it was, like that thought carried through time. And to not have that, and the anxiety that I didn't even know that I had, the time schedules, I bit my nails, I had eating disorders, I drank alcohol, I picked my face, my hair would fall out. I mean, I cannot tell you how different my life is because of it. But it wasn't like that. It was like that first one, then that second one, and then it sort of went and it's still unfolding now. And I think the other thing is, I no longer feel that, like, when you were reading out, like, this is your qualifications, this is your experience, one of my things was, I'm a workaholic, I need to get the next qualification, the next qualification, the next qualification. I don't feel the need to do that anymore. So that might be the end. If you interview me in 10 years, that might just still be it. So yeah, it's had a deeply profound impact on my life.